The Vermeer's Shadow. Boston, Massachusetts, March 18, 1990. The wind howling off the Atlantic carried the faint, decaying scent of stale beer and trampled clover, the lingering ghost of St. Patrick's Day celebrations. For Detective Ava Rossi of the Boston Police Department, the early hours of March 18th were supposed to be the quiet denouement of the city's most chaotic holiday. She was 34, sharp-featured, with an intuitive mind that often saw the human truth lurking beneath the police report's dry prose. Her current task, managing a minor skirmish between two belligerent, green-clad drunks in the South End, was utterly mundane. Then the radio crackled with a tone that instantly negated the noise of the city. A high-priority alert. A whispered code. Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Break-in. Possible hostages. Ava's blood ran cold. The Gardner Museum was not merely a collection. It was a sanctuary. Built around a Venetian-style courtyard, it housed a priceless, idiosyncratic collection of masterpieces, amassed by the formidable socialite Isabella Stewart Gardner herself. The museum's security, however, was notoriously archaic, relying on motion sensors and human guards rather than modern technology. It was a beautiful, vulnerable target. Ava sped toward the Fenway Kenmore neighborhood, the flashing blue lights reflecting off the ancient brickwork. When she arrived, the scene was eerily subdued. Unlike the chaotic response to a typical robbery, the perimeter was quiet, marked by the rigid posture of uniformed officers who seemed afraid to move. She found the chief of security, Mr. Fitzwilliam, a man usually of stiff dignity, now slumped and shaking. "It was the FBI," he whispered, his voice catching. "They said they were responding to a report of a security violation. 2 of them. Uniforms, badges, everything." Ava walked through the grand, heavy doors and into the museum's silence. The hallowed halls, usually vibrant with art and history, now felt profoundly violated. She was led to the security office, where 2 young, off-duty guards, Richard and Randy, were found tied up in the security office. They were handcuffed, their mouths taped, but otherwise physically unharmed. They were professionals, Detective. Richard stammered, his wrists raw. One guy, tall, kind of a clean-cut look. The other one was shorter, nervous. "They put us in cuffs, but before they tightened them, the tall one, he put padding under the metal. Said he didn't want to bruise us. FBI agents don't pad your cuffs." That detail, the absurd, professional courtesy, snapped the narrative for Ava. This wasn't an FBI raid. This was a staged intrusion using the ultimate authority as a disguise. The efficiency, the psychological manipulation, it was deeply unsettling. Ava began her meticulous walkthrough, noting the perpetrator's route. They hadn't forced any locks. They had been admitted. They knew the procedures. The real horror began in the galleries. The Dutch room. The short gallery. The rooms were not empty, but their essence had been brutally extracted. On the walls, the bronze mounting hooks remained, but the canvases were gone. In the Dutch room, the empty space where Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the master's only known seascape, had hung, was a gaping wound. Next to it, the space belonging to a lady and gentleman in black was equally void. The hilt of a knife used to slice the masterpieces from their wooden stretchers lay discarded on the floor. Ava ran her hand along the jagged tear in the canvas of the Rembrandt still attached to the frame. The thieves had cut the work out hastily, showing complete disregard for the integrity of the canvas, but chillingly professional focus on the valuable, portable paint and pigment. They weren't art lovers. They were merchants. In the short gallery, the most painful absence, Johannes Vermeer's The Concert. One of only 34 known Vermeers in the world. Its loss was catastrophic, estimated in the hundreds of millions. The museum was now internationally infamous. Ava noticed the odd pattern of selection. The thieves had taken masterpieces, but they had ignored other, equally valuable and more portable works. They skipped a Titian and a Raphael, yet they took a small, obscure drawing by Rembrandt and a bronze Chinese beaker. This wasn't a random smash and grab. It was a carefully curated shopping list. They must have been running on a strict timer, a local forensic officer noted, his voice hushed. 81 minutes. That's how long they were inside. Quickest grand theft of this magnitude in history. Ava looked at the list of stolen items. 13 pieces. Why 13? A superstitious number, perhaps, or a specific collection request. She fixated on the missing Vermeer. The painting, an intimate domestic scene, was notoriously difficult to sell, too famous, too unique. It meant the thief wasn't looking for a quick resale. They were looking for a long-term hideout, or a private collector so wealthy and powerful that they could display the Vermeer in secret luxury for the rest of their life. The FBI arrived just as dawn broke over Boston. Leading the federal team was Special Agent James "Mac" McDougal. McDougal was a career agent, focused on organized crime and drug trafficking, with a practical, cynical view of the world. He saw the theft not as an assault on culture, but as a potential $500 million bargaining chip. "They're going to call with a ransom demand, Rossi," McDougal announced, ignoring the artistic tragedy surrounding them. "This smells like local Irish mob looking for a retirement fund. They'll demand 20 mil, we'll talk them down, and we'll get the pieces back, damaged, but back." Ava bristled. "This is not a car theft, McDougal. These pieces, particularly the Vermeer, are payment, not collateral. You can't fence a Vermeer. This is bigger than the local mob. This is international." McDougal frowned. "You focus on the aesthetic, Rossi. I focus on the cash. We work together, but this is my jurisdiction now. Find me the link to a mobster who can move this kind of weight, and we can close this before the insurance company has an aneurysm." Ava nodded, knowing the fight had just begun. The FBI uniform was the initial phantom. But the real ghost, the sophisticated mind that planned this perfect, 81-minute museum heist, was still out there, hiding in the dark corners of the world's art market. Ava took one last look at the empty frames, the violent, geometric shapes left on the walls, and promised herself she would find the hand that wielded the knife. The trail led through the beautiful chaos of the art world and down into the brutal efficiency of organized crime. The chaotic energy of the early hours had been replaced by the cold, methodical precision of the FBI. Crime scene tape crisscrossed the entire museum, the yellow plastic a jarring contrast to the rich Venetian tapestries. Detective Ava Rossi felt a growing, icy frustration. The case was hers, a matter of the soul of the city, but the evidence was now being processed by Agent McDougal's large, impersonal team. McDougal, broad and pragmatic, stood in the center of the Dutch room, focusing on the floor rather than the walls. $500 million gone, Rossi. And what's our lead? 2 bored guards who got suckered by a pair of dime store costumes. This is a snatch and grab dressed up in a federal uniform. Ava pointed to the massive, ornate gilt frame where the Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee had hung. The canvas had been sliced crudely from its stretcher bars, leaving ragged tufts of paint and fiber clinging to the edges. A snatch and grab doesn't cut a Rembrandt out of its frame like a cheap poster, Ava countered, her voice sharp. They had time. 81 minutes. They chose to damage the work rather than risk the noise of removing the stretcher. That's not haste. That's a calculated risk taken by someone who understands the weight of what they're doing. And look at the selection. Ava walked them through the crime. The thieves ignored the Titian, easier to move and worth a fortune. They bypassed the more modern, abstract pieces. They focused on masterpieces from the Dutch Golden Age and, crucially, a tiny Chinese ritual vessel. It's a shopping list, McDougal. Someone knew exactly what they wanted. They didn't take the easiest targets. They took the irreplaceable targets that would leave the biggest emotional void. This isn't about selling art for cash. It's about art as currency, or art as an ultimate trophy. McDougal conceded a point, his eyes narrowing. Let's focus on the human factor then. The guards. The 2 watchmen, Richard and Randy, were brought in for intensive interrogation. Their stories were rehearsed but consistent. The men in the FBI uniforms were convincing. Yet, Ava kept circling back to the padding detail. Why the courtesy? During her review of the security logs, Ava discovered a telling entry. Shortly before the 2 uniformed men gained entry, one of the guards had briefly disabled a motion sensor in the employee kitchen, citing a false alarm. The time of the deactivation coincided with a phone call the guard received from a private number. The guard claimed it was a wrong number, but Ava felt the hairs rise on her neck. It was a point of vulnerability exploited, not breached. The guards weren't necessarily in on it, Ava theorized to McDougal. But one of them was conditioned. Someone created a scenario where they would expect a security issue, then used the FBI uniforms as confirmation. a perfect exploitation of trust. While McDougal's team was running background checks on every Boston resident with a prior conviction for petty theft, Ava ran parallel research on the criminal pathology of major art heists. She cross-referenced the unique selection of the stolen pieces with known high-profile, private collectors in Europe and the Middle East, people who could afford to own a Vermeer without ever showing it. This led her deep into the world of art repatriation claims and World War II stolen goods, a shadowy market often intertwined with organized crime. Her search soon brought her to Liam O'Connell. O'Connell was a talented but disgraced art restorer, known in Boston's underbelly for his skills in forgery and handling contraband. He had the nuanced understanding of art history to curate the list and the technical skill to slice the canvases cleanly. He also had loose but acknowledged ties to the city's organized crime factions, specifically the Irish-American O'Brien crew. When O'Connell was brought in for questioning, he was cocky and dismissive. He provided a tight, seemingly ironclad alibi. He was out of state, visiting an ailing relative in upstate New York, and had phone records and gas receipts to prove it. McDougal was ready to drop him. "He's clean, Rossi. You're wasting time chasing ghosts while the ransom demand is still our primary objective." Ava felt a cold certainty about O'Connell that she couldn't yet prove. "He's not clean, McDougal. He's insulated. He has the mind for the list and the hands for the cut. But he didn't do the muscle work. He subcontracted the theft itself." The discovery of the comic book alias in the D.B. Cooper case had taught Ava a crucial lesson. The criminal mind often leaves clever, personal signatures. Here, the signature was the selective genius of the stolen art, and the ultimate signature was the empty space left by the Vermeer. Ava returned to the museum alone in the late afternoon. She stood in the Dutch room, the silence profound and heavy. The empty spaces were mesmerizing. The thieves had taken the essence of the collection, leaving the museum itself as a hollow, beautiful shell. She walked into the security office again, looking at the log book. The time of the emergency phone call to the guard, the one who received the supposed wrong number. It was traced to a payphone outside an abandoned warehouse in the city's industrial district. Ava knew that O'Connell's alibi was too perfect, his denial too practiced. She had to break the alibi, not with physical evidence from the museum, but with the invisible evidence of communication. The warehouse district payphone was the nexus point, the point where the art world expertise met the organized crime muscle. They used the idea of the FBI to get in, Ava murmured to herself, staring at the blurred black and white photograph of the payphone. They used O'Connell's mind for the list. Now we find the man who made the call. The hunt was shifting from the aesthetic tragedy of the stolen art to the dark, functional machinery of the Boston underworld. And Ava Rossi was about to dive in. Boston, Massachusetts, March 1990. The official FBI line, dictated by Assistant Director Sterling from Washington, was clear: focus on ransom negotiation. Agent McDougal, a man who lived and died by procedure, was already setting up back channels through known informants in New York, anticipating a call from a negotiator demanding a percentage of the $500 million insurance valuation. But Ava Rossi knew the call wouldn't come. The Vermeer was too valuable to be held hostage. It was payment, and payment meant the trail led not through polite negotiation, but through the city's dark, beating heart, organized crime. Ava's focus remained glued to the single piece of physical evidence that contradicted Liam O'Connell's ironclad alibi: the payphone outside the abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. She spent days sifting through phone logs, cross-referencing all calls made from that number in the 72 hours leading up to the heist. It was a digital needle in a haystack of discarded manufacturing equipment. Finally, she found it. A single outgoing call from the warehouse payphone, made 3 hours before the museum break-in, routed directly to a private, untraceable number registered to an obscure shell corporation. The corporation's primary address led not to a legitimate business, but to a discreet, well-guarded social club in South Boston, the known headquarters of Patrick, the Duke O'Brien. O'Brien was a relic, a man in his late 60s who maintained the facade of a successful, legitimate Irish-American businessman while running a vast operation that included loan sharking, illegal gambling, and, critically, acting as a logistical hub for transnational smuggling. Ava slapped the phone records down on McDougal's desk. O'Connell's alibi is paper-thin. He drove upstate, made a quick stop, and coordinated the hit from a burner phone with O'Brien's people. He's the brain, and O'Brien is the muscle and the exit strategy. McDougal, wary of Ava's aggressive pursuit of a high-profile target, pushed back. "We don't rate a major figure like O'Brien on a hunch and a payphone record, Rossi. He'll bury us in paperwork. He deals in cash and guns, not old masters." "That's exactly the point, McDougal," Ava argued, pacing his cramped office. "The art is the currency. International drug and arms rings don't want bags of cash that can be tracked. They want assets that can be moved silently and instantly legitimized by a powerful private collector. A Vermeer is better than gold. It bypasses every customs and finance law in the world." Ava's theory was compelling enough to secure a warrant. She and McDougal led a joint task force, a grudging alliance between the Boston police and the FBI, on a raid of O'Brien's main warehouse, a sprawling, anonymous structure near the docks. The atmosphere during the raid was thick with tension and hostility. O'Brien's men were organized and quiet, their loyalty absolute. The warehouse was clean, meticulously organized, and contained nothing illegal except for boxes of untaxed liquor and some heavy-duty industrial shipping containers. McDougal was furious. "A waste of time, Rossi. We just tipped off a major player and embarrassed the Bureau. There's no art here." As the FBI began to pack up, defeated, Ava noticed something that didn't belong. Tucked in a corner, behind a stack of empty pallets, was a small, crudely painted landscape. It was terrible, amateurish, sloppy, clearly a forgery intended to practice technique. But the canvas size and the style of the stretcher bars were instantly recognizable to Ava. "Look at this," Ava ordered. She had the forensic team analyze the stretcher bars of the amateur painting. They matched the wood grain and age of the stretchers that the thieves had violently cut the masterpieces from. "O'Connell was here," Ava stated, her voice tight with triumph. "He was practicing the slicing technique on cheap canvases. O'Brien provided the logistics, O'Connell provided the artistry, and the FBI uniforms provided the entry. They got the paintings out, but they didn't store them here. They used this as the last American drop-off before putting them on a boat." McDougal, seeing the cold, hard evidence, finally bought into Ava's vision. They established that O'Brien's network specialized in moving high-value contraband across the Atlantic, often utilizing cargo ships destined for the Mediterranean. The paintings were almost certainly on the water, heading toward Europe. Further pressure on O'Brien's lower-level associates yielded a name, the curator. This was the code name for the ultimate recipient, the person who had placed the order. The name was whispered with a mix of fear and reverence, suggesting a figure of immense power, someone who moved effortlessly between the old-world aristocracy and the new world of organized crime. The working theory now was complex and terrifying. The paintings were not simply part of a trade. They were possibly going to be integrated into a private, underground collection, perhaps someone seeking to reconstitute a collection lost during the World Wars, or a figure using art to launder truly astronomical sums of money. Ava realized the stakes had just risen exponentially. They were no longer hunting Boston thugs. They were hunting a sophisticated international ghost with an expensive, highly refined taste for irreplaceable beauty. "We need to get to Europe, McDougal," Ava said, meeting his gaze. "We found the gateway. Now we find the museum where this curator intends to hang our Vermeer." McDougal, his career now squarely pinned on this explosive, high-stakes international case, nodded slowly. The hunt for the ghost in the uniform was over. The hunt for the ghost in the gallery had just begun. Venice, Italy, spring 1990. The transition from the gritty pragmatism of South Boston to the elegant decay of Venice was immediate and jarring. Detective Ava Rossi and Agent McDougal found themselves operating in a labyrinth of canals and ancient palaces, where the rules of engagement were dictated by lineage and whispered promises, not federal jurisdiction. The investigation had moved beyond mere crime. It was now a deep dive into the historical and cultural underground. Their target was Dr. Elena Vespucci, the alleged curator. Vespucci was a figure of profound contradictions, an octogenarian art historian who commanded immense respect in academic circles for her work on Renaissance provenance, yet who was rumored to possess unsettling ties to the post-war black market. Her primary residence was a dilapidated but formidable palazzo facing the Grand Canal. MacDougall, relying on classic FBI pressure tactics, wanted to storm the palazzo. Ava, however, insisted on an approach rooted in respect and leverage. Vespucci is old money MacDougall. She doesn't fear jail. She fears dishonor and the destruction of her legacy. We don't threaten her. We make her an offer she can't refuse. Ava secured a quiet, private meeting with Dr. Vespucci in her library, a cavernous space filled with dusty folios and the scent of old paper. Vespucci, frail but possessing eyes of cold, unnerving intelligence, treated Ava as an amusing diversion. "You are here for the American paintings," Vespucci stated, offering no preamble. "The clumsy little theft orchestrated by your Boston gangsters. Such a pity to treat such masterpieces with such vulgar haste." Ava laid out her leverage, not mentioning O'Brien or O'Connell, but focusing on Vespucci's own complicated history. Ava presented evidence linking Vespucci to the movement of certain displaced artworks immediately after World War II. Pieces that were technically seized from retreating Nazi officials, but whose true ownership was deliberately obscured. "You have a legacy, Dr. Vespucci," Ava said softly. "A history built on finding lost art. If we expose your methods, you won't be remembered as a restorer, but as a fence." Vespucci regarded her with a flicker of respect. She admitted, without remorse, that she managed a discreet, high-value exchange network. She confirmed that the Gardner pieces were ordered by a powerful European entity, a figure who was using the art as a non-monetary asset in exchange for weapons and intelligence from O'Brien's network. "The Boston Irish," Vespucci sighed, dismissing them with a wave of her hand. "They saw the art as mere currency, crude oil for their engines. My clients saw them as trophies, a collection that only power could acquire." Vespucci revealed that the paintings were indeed destined to leave Italy soon, scheduled for a final transfer point. She gave Ava the location, a heavily fortified, disused customs depot on the outskirts of Venice, near the mainland railway lines. The transfer was set for the following night. Vespucci, seeking to eliminate all loose ends, stipulated that O'Brien's men would be at the depot, ensuring the shipment's security. "You asked for the truth, detective," Vespucci said, her voice turning icy. "I have given you the bait. Now, you must catch the bigger fish." Ava and MacDougall left the palazzo with a mix of triumph and unease. Vespucci had given them the where and the when, but Ava suspected it was a calculated play. Vespucci wanted O'Brien neutralized by the FBI, ensuring the purity of her own operation. The risk of ambush was immense. MacDougall, who had been orchestrating logistical support from the U.S. Embassy, was ready to deploy Italian carabinieri and a coordinated international task force. "We hit the depot hard. We seize the paintings, and we take O'Brien alive." But Ava's gut instinct screamed caution. She reviewed the known movements of O'Brien's organization and Vespucci's ruthless reputation. The depot was too obvious. The information was too clean. "It's a trap, MacDougall," Ava insisted. "Vespucci gave us O'Brien. She wants a bloodbath to erase the trail. We have to assume O'Brien knows we're coming. Or, worse, that the paintings aren't there yet." They spent the remaining hours mapping out the depot's security, preparing for an assault that Ava believed would either recover the world's most famous stolen art or cost them their lives. The cobblestone streets and dark waterways of Venice, beautiful as they were, now felt like the jaws of a vast, elegant trap sprung by the elegant, ruthless hand of the curator. The fate of the Vermeer rested on their ability to outsmart not just the Boston thugs, but the refined, centuries-old cunning of the European art black market. Venice, Italy, night, late March 1990. The disused customs depot stood isolated near the railway spurs leading out of Venice, a cold, concrete fortress surrounded by stagnant water and shadows. The air was thick with the smell of brine and industrial decay. Ava Rossi and Agent MacDougall, accompanied by a small, heavily armed unit of carabinieri, took up their positions under the cloak of a heavy, humid night. Ava felt the intense, metallic tang of adrenaline. She and MacDougall had agreed on a revised strategy, a cautious surveillance first, avoiding Vespucci's probable expectation of a full-frontal FBI assault. "We wait for the exchange," MacDougall murmured into his radio, his gaze fixed on the depot's massive rolling door. We let the two sides make their move, then we sweep in. We get the Art and O'Brien. Just after midnight, two unmarked vans, registered to a known associate of Patrick O'Brien, backed up to the loading dock. A group of 4 men, all heavily built and carrying the unmistakable swagger of the Boston underworld, emerged. They were met by a sleek, black sedan from which emerged 2 men, clearly not O'Brien's muscle, but figures from the European criminal fringe, possibly Balkan or Eastern European smugglers, the ultimate transporters. The atmosphere crackled with tension. O'Brien's second-in-command supervised the transfer of several large, rectangular crates. Ava and MacDougall watched, breath held tight, convinced the crates contained the Vermeer and the Rembrandt. As the crates were loaded onto the sedan's support vehicle, the signal was given. Ava and MacDougall burst from their cover, MacDougall shouting in broken Italian for the Carabinieri to move in. Chaos erupted. O'Brien's men, clearly expecting a confrontation, returned fire immediately. The depot became a cacophony of echoing gunfire and shattering glass. MacDougall, focused on neutralizing the command structure, went straight for O'Brien's lieutenant. During the intense, close-quarters combat, MacDougall took a hit to his shoulder, dropping heavily behind a stack of rusted containers. Ava didn't hesitate. She covered MacDougall, laying down suppressing fire that pinned the remaining Boston thugs. Her training took over. She was moving, firing, and thinking, all while the fear of losing her partner fueled her precision. The skirmish was swift and brutal. The Carabinieri unit, highly disciplined, managed to subdue O'Brien's men and the European smugglers. Ava rushed to MacDougall, whose face was pale but whose grip on his weapon was firm. "I'm fine, Rossi," he grunted, wincing as he pressed a field bandage to his shoulder. "Get the Art. Secure the crates." Ava and the remaining agents swarmed the delivery vehicle. They pried open the heavy wooden crates, their hearts pounding with the anticipation of finally seeing the masters. Rembrandt's sweeping gesture of the waves, Vermeer's quiet domestic light. The crates were empty. The silence that followed the discovery was deafening, the truth sinking in like lead. Vespucci hadn't lured them into a simple ambush. She had led them to a dry run, a fake handover designed to eliminate O'Brien's crew and establish a false narrative that the Art had been successfully moved into Europe. MacDougall, despite his injury, struggled to his feet, rage and frustration burning in his eyes. He stormed over to the captured second-in-command of the O'Brien crew and hauled him up. "Where are they? Where did O'Brien move the paintings?" MacDougall yelled, his control slipping. The mobster, bleeding from a superficial wound, merely spat on the ground. "You got played, Fed. The Duke is smarter than your old lady in the palace." Later, under intense interrogation, the mobster confirmed that O'Brien had organized the fake delivery to satisfy the curator. The real paintings, he claimed, had been moved hours earlier to a safe harbor and were on their way to an entirely different continent. He maintained that the Duke had been double-crossed himself. He hadn't known the final destination and was merely responsible for providing the initial muscle and logistics. He swore O'Brien had been waiting for payment and had not yet received the final destination instructions. Ava refused to believe it. O'Brien had organized the initial theft with O'Connell, and O'Connell had ties to the museum's fabric. O'Brien was lying to protect the actual recipient. The ransom narrative had been completely abandoned. The paintings were an investment, a dark, valuable commodity that had been swallowed by the international black market. Standing in the ransacked depot, Ava looked at the empty crates. She felt the heavy weight of defeat, but something clicked in her mind. A final, crucial inconsistency. Why the elaborate decoy? Why risk O'Brien's crew simply for a fake handover? She recalled O'Brien's second-in-command shouting, "The Duke is smarter than your old lady in the palace." This implied O'Brien knew Vespucci's plan to betray him. If O'Brien knew he was walking into a trap, why send the fake crates? Because the real paintings had never left Boston. They had been moved just enough to satisfy the initial exchange, only to be brought back into hiding. The entire European excursion, Ava suddenly realized, had been an elaborate diversion to focus law enforcement attention away from the true, final hiding place. Ava placed a call to Boston, ordering a complete, forensic reinvestigation of the one person whose involvement was both essential and overlooked. The person who had the access and the artistry to curate the list, but whose alibi had initially passed the cursory check. The final piece of the puzzle, she suspected, was waiting for her back in Massachusetts. Boston, Massachusetts, late spring 1990. Agent McDougal, his arm in a sling, and Detective Ava Rossi returned to Boston with nothing but paperwork and a painful realization. They had been expertly diverted. The empty crates in Venice were the final, elegant misdirection in a crime that had been planned not for international transfer, but for local disappearance. Ava knew the answer lay not in the European black market, but in the specific, intimate knowledge of the Gardner Museum itself. She returned to the initial scene, studying the 13 empty frames, particularly the one that had held Rembrandt's The Storm. A memory of the forensic report flashed in her mind. The small, almost invisible inscription left on the canvas's stretcher bar, obscured by the slice mark. The inscription was Latin, scrawled perhaps in a moment of extreme tension or purpose. Redemptio. Redemption. Redemption, Ava murmured, standing alone in the silent, echoing Dutch room. Not sale. Not ransom. Redemption. She realized the motivation was not purely financial or even criminal. It was obsessional. The thief hadn't wanted the money the art represented. They wanted the power over the art, the power to take it, hide it, and possibly, one day, return it on their own terms, thus achieving a form of moral or historical redemption. This line of thinking led Ava away from the street thugs and back to the museum's inner circle. She reviewed the list of initial suspects, particularly those with deep historical ties and financial instability. One name, previously cleared with a casual alibi, screamed out, Alastair Thorne. Thorne was a respected art consultant and a distant, impoverished relative of Isabella Stewart Gardner's line. He was deeply entrenched in the museum's governance, serving as an unofficial security advisor. He had the curatorial knowledge to craft the list and, crucially, the access to understand the museum's structural vulnerabilities. His alibi for the night of the heist, a long drive to a remote family property, was easily fabricated. Ava knew Thorne was the missing link. He used O'Connell's expertise for the selection and slicing, and O'Brien's muscle for the entry and exit, the uniformed ghosts. But he never intended the art to leave his control. Ava and McDougal tracked Thorne to a dusty, rarely used basement office within the museum's complex. The official search had focused only on the public galleries and immediate storage areas. Thorne's office was adjacent to the old, unmapped service tunnels, maintenance corridors that had been used by staff decades ago but were now closed off and forgotten. They found a recently disturbed section of flooring hidden beneath a heavy, antique filing cabinet in Thorne's office. Beneath it was a small, dusty opening leading into the darkness. McDougal, despite his injury, followed Ava into the damp, narrow tunnel. The air was thick and cold, smelling of concrete and old textiles. They moved through the darkness for several excruciating minutes, until the tunnel opened into a large, unexpected underground chamber, a forgotten cistern or mahout used during the museum's original construction. And there they were, stacked neatly against the far wall, covered by heavy canvas drop cloths, were the 13 stolen masterpieces. The Vermeer, the concert, was pristine, its colors muted by the darkness but still holding its luminous quality. The Rembrandt seascape, though ragged around the edges from the thief's knife, was breathtakingly intact. The thieves had taken exceptional care of the works once they were removed from the frames. Thorne, who had been meticulously inspecting the works with a flashlight, stood over them, looking up at Ava and McDougal with a look of fierce, proprietary love. "They're magnificent, aren't they?" Thorne whispered, his voice resonating in the chamber. "They belong here, in the heart of the museum, not as collateral for thugs, and certainly not as insurance fodder for the board." Thorne confessed quickly, without regret. He revealed he had hired O'Connell and O'Brien to execute the theft, giving them instructions to use the FBI cover, which Thorne himself had researched. He had them cut the canvases to create chaos, and immediately after the successful exit, Thorne intercepted the works and hid them in the abandoned tunnel, a place no one, least of all the FBI, would ever look. The European operation was a carefully placed red herring, designed to give Thorne years of undisturbed access to his hidden collection. I gave them a purpose, detective, Thorne pleaded, tears welling in his eyes as he looked at the Vermeer. They were dying up there, owned by lawyers and tourists. Here, they are truly mine. I saved them. Thorne was swiftly arrested, his obsession providing the final, tragic piece of evidence. The 13 masterpieces were carefully removed from the secret chamber, their return to the light making international headlines. The empty frames of the Gardner Museum were filled once more, the wounds of the theft slowly beginning to heal. MacDougall, standing beside Ava as the Vermeer was hoisted back into its rightful, if still slightly sliced, frame, extended his hand. You were right, Rossi. It wasn't about the cash. It was about the pathology. Thank you. Ava looked at the quiet perfection of the Vermeer's light, now returned to the world. She knew that the true danger of the Gardner heist was not the financial loss, but the realization that the greatest art thefts are not executed by criminals seeking profit, but by deeply damaged souls seeking redemption through ownership. The shadows of the empty frames were gone, replaced by the shadows of the masters themselves. But Ava knew that the pursuit of beauty, when divorced from morality, could lead to the most dangerous of crimes. The Vermeer was back, but its tragic shadow would forever linger over Boston.